Good evening, and welcome back to our quiet corner of Edwardian England, where the lamp is low and a place is kept for you by the window. Tonight we ride north into the mist of the Yorkshire moors, in the fading gold of a September evening, 1906. A young woman named Marielle Faringdon, 24 and alone in the world, steps from the evening train, met by a lamplit carriage and driven the slow miles up the moor road to a stone house left to her by an aunt she never met. She has never had a home of her own, yet each misty morning she finds a small kindness waiting, a fire lit, a book left open, a shawl folded in her colour. Who leaves them, she cannot say. She knows only that the house seems, somehow, to have been waiting for her. So rest your head and dim your light. If you find comfort in these quiet tales, do stay and subscribe, and let us keep this corner glowing for you. And tell us softly, where are you listening from tonight? Now, let us begin. The evening train came slowly up out of the south, through the last gold of a September afternoon, carrying Marielle Faringdon north to a house she had never seen, left to her by a woman she had never known. She sat alone in a corner of an upholstered third-class compartment, a slight young woman of 24 in a plain dark travelling suit, and a thin grey cloak grown soft with wear, her one small leather bag on the rack above her, her gloved hands folded quietly in her lap, watching the country change through the window. She had watched it change all the long day. The soft green south had given way, hour by hour, mile by mile, to a harder, wilder, lovelier land. The hedges had turned to dry stone walls, the gentle fields to high rolling moor, the tame woods to lonely stands of wind-bent trees. And now, as the light began to go, the train ran up through a country of purple hills and deep wooded valleys and long grey stone villages, a country Marielle had never seen in her life, and that was, she could scarcely believe it, to be her home. She had liked the changing of it, watching from her corner through the long day, though it frightened her a little too. The soft south she knew. She had been born to it, had spent all her narrow life in its tame green counties, its trim hedges and mild skies. This north was another country altogether, bigger, wilder, older, with a beauty that did not trouble to be pretty. And she did not know whether such a country would have room in it for a small, quiet southern governess who had never in her life been anywhere that wanted her. She pressed her gloved hands together in her lap and watched the great hills go by, and tried not to hope too much, for she had learned in 24 years that hoping too much was the surest way to be hurt. She could scarcely believe any of it. She had turned it over in her mind all the long journey, and still could not make it feel real. 3 weeks ago, she had been a governess in a tall, cold house in the south, teaching the 2 small daughters of a family who were kind enough in their way, but to whom she was furniture. A useful, quiet young woman who came with the schoolroom. 3 weeks ago, she had had no home, no place, no prospect, but the long grey road of other people's houses stretching away before her. She had packed her whole life into the one small bag on the rack above her, and it had not filled it. That was the truth of her 24 years, and she had felt it keenly. folding her few plain things into the worn leather that morning, that everything she owned in the world went into one small bag with room to spare, a change of linen, her mother's thin gold ring that she never wore, a few books, a photograph of her father. That was all. She had no furniture, no home to put it in, nothing that was hers and stayed in one place. She had lived out of that bag for 6 years, from house to house, schoolroom to schoolroom, and she was so used to it that she had stopped, mostly, minding. Only sometimes, late, in a borrowed bed in a strange cold house, she had let herself wish, just for a moment, for a place that was her own, a room that would not be taken back, a door she might shut and know that behind it was somewhere she belonged. She had never told anyone that wish. She had hardly told herself. And then had come the letter, the solicitor's letter, stiff and formal and unbelievable, telling her that her father's aunt, a great-aunt Marielle, had never met. One Miss Marielle Faringdon of the North Riding of Yorkshire had died, full of years, and had left her house and all that was in it to Marielle, her only living kin. Her only living kin. That was the phrase that had undone her, sitting in her cold little schoolroom reading the letter over and over. She had not known she had any kin at all. Her mother had died when she was small, her father 2 winters past, and she had thought herself quite alone in the world, the last of her line, belonging to no one and nowhere. And now here was a great aunt, dead before Marielle could meet her, reaching out from the far north with a house, a home, a place, leaving everything to the great niece she had never known, as though she had been thinking of her all this while, across all the long miles and years. Marielle knew almost nothing of her. Aunt Marigold had been a name only, mentioned rarely in Marielle's childhood, always in that soft, vague, half-finished way families keep for their odd ones, their wanderers, the ones who go away. She had left the family young, Marielle understood, before Marielle was born, had quarrelled with no one, simply gone north to live her own life in her own way, alone on the moor above a little town called Helmsley, and had lived there quietly for 40 years and more, and grown old there, and died there, and been buried there. A great-aunt Marielle had never seen, and now never would. Why she had left everything to Marielle, whom she had never met, Marielle could not imagine. Perhaps there was simply no one else. Perhaps a lonely old woman, at the end, had left her house to the only young blood left in the line, out of a kind of duty. Marielle did not know, but she was going north to find out, or at least to settle the house and see it sold. Going north because she had nowhere else in the world to go, and a house on a moor she had never seen was more than she had had 3 weeks ago, which was nothing at all. The train slowed and stopped at last at a small station high in the hills, a single stone platform under the darkening sky, gas lamps just lit and glowing soft in the gathering dusk. Helmsley, or near it. The end of the branch line, the porter had told her, the last stop where she must get down. Marielle rose and took down her small bag and stepped down onto the platform into the cool moorland dusk. And the train, with a sigh and a great slow breath of steam, drew away behind her and left her standing alone on the little platform at the edge of the moor, in the failing light at the end of the world. It was very quiet. The train's noise died away down the valley, and there was nothing left but the deep, vast quiet of the moor. A quiet such as Marielle had never heard in all her life of towns and tall houses. A quiet made of wind far off in the heather, and the cry of some moorland bird, and the enormous silence of the hills going up into the dusk all around. She stood on the platform in the cool, sweet air, which smelled of heather and peat and coming night, and she was, for a moment, afraid. Afraid of the wildness and the strangeness and the loneliness of it. Afraid that she had come to the end of the world for nothing, that there would be no place for her here either, that the house would be cold and shut and unwelcoming, and she a stranger at its door. It was the fear she had carried all her life, packed away with the rest in the small bag of her heart. The fear of arriving somewhere and finding no place had been kept for her. She had felt it at the door of every new house, every new family, every strange cold schoolroom, the small cold clench of not knowing whether she would be wanted or only tolerated or merely used. She felt it now on the dark platform at the edge of the moor, more sharply than she had ever felt it. For this was the end of the line, the end of the world, and if there was no place for her here, there was nowhere left to go. And then, out of the dusk at the end of the platform, an old man came toward her, slow and stooped and kind, and touched his hat and said in a soft, broad northern voice, "Miss Faringdon, is it? Miss Marielle Faringdon. I'd know ye anywhere. You've the family look." And Marielle, who had not known she had a family look or a family, felt something ease, a very little, in her frightened breast. His name was Cuthbert Thirkell, he told her, taking up her small bag in his great gnarled hand as though it weighed nothing. He had been Miss Marigold's coachman these 40 years, and her father's man before that, and he had come to fetch Miss Marielle to the house. He was a big old man, broad and bowed with age, with a long, kind, deeply lined face and grey whiskers and slow, gentle eyes, muffled to the chin in a many-caped black coachman's greatcoat against the moorland chill. And he led her, unhurried, off the platform and out to where an old carriage stood waiting in the station yard, its 2 brass lamps lit and glowing warm in the dusk. A patient dark horse in the traces cropping quietly at the verge. "She'd have wanted me to fetch ye proper," said old Cuthbert, handing Marielle up into the carriage as though she were a great lady and not a poor young governess with one small bag. In the carriage, with the lamps lit, not have ye walk, nor take the carrier's cart. She was particular about that sort of thing, Miss Marigold. Particular about a welcome. He said it as though Miss Marigold were only just out of the room and might be back at any moment. And Marielle, settling into the worn, soft leather of the old carriage, drawing the rug he gave her over her knees, felt again that small, strange easing, that sense of being expected, of being, somehow, already known. They set off up the moor road in the last of the light, the old horse leaning slow and steady into the climb, the carriage swaying gently, the 2 brass lamps throwing their soft gold pools onto the pale road ahead, and the dark heather on either side. And Marielle sat in the swaying warmth of the old carriage and looked out at the moor going by. The vast, dark, rolling moor with its last purple bloom of heather and its winding dry stone walls going up and up into the misty dusk. And it was wild and strange and lonely beyond anything she had known. And yet, in the warm, lamp-lit carriage, with the old man's broad back steady on the box before her and the patient horse drawing her on, it was not frightening any longer, but beautiful and deep and still, and somehow, though she could not have said how, kind. The dusk deepened as they climbed. The mist came down soft over the moor, rising from the damp ground and drifting across the road, so that the lamps lit only a little way ahead, and the world closed in to a warm, small, moving pool of light in a great, soft darkness. Marielle grew drowsy with the sway and the warmth and the long day's travel, and old Cuthbert from the box talked to her now and then over his shoulder, slow and easy, telling her the names of things she could not see, the beck down in the valley, the old abbey ruins in the woods below, the farms and the fells, the whole dark country that had been Miss Marigold's and was now, impossibly, hers. She liked his voice, old Cuthbert's, slow and broad and easy, rolling out into the dark. It asked nothing of her. She had spent her life being spoken to by people who wanted something, a lesson taught, a child minded, a task done. And here was an old man talking to her only to ease the dark road, telling her the names of unseen becks and fells as though she had every right to know them, as though they were already hers to know. It was a small thing, but Marielle had lived on small things and knew their worth, and she gathered his easy talk to her in the dark, like warmth from a fire. And he spoke of Miss Marigold a little as they went, not sadly, but warmly, the way you speak of someone dearly loved and not truly gone. "You'll not have known her, I reckon," he said. "Your great aunt. She spoke of ye, though. Oh, aye. This last year or two, when she took poorly, she spoke of ye a deal. Her brother's son's girl, away down south, all alone in the world, teaching in other folks' houses. It grieved her, that did, that you'd no place of your own. She used to say, that lass should have this house one day, Cuthbert. She should come here. There's room for her here. She'd say it, sitting by the fire of an evening. There's room for her here." Old Cuthbert clicked to the horse and was quiet a moment, and then he said softly, "So you're come. That's right. That's as it should be. She'd be glad." Marielle sat very still in the dark, swaying carriage and did not trust herself to speak. She had not known that anyone in all the world had thought of her, spoken of her, wished a place for her, had not known that a lonely old woman on a far moor had sat by her fire of an evening, and grieved that her great niece had no home, and wished her here, and left her everything. It was almost more than Marielle could hold, coming after so many years of belonging nowhere. And she blinked in the darkness and looked out at the misty moor, and let the small, warm, strange feeling grow in her breast, the feeling she would come to know so well in the days ahead, the feeling of being expected, of being, after all, and for the first time in her life, wanted somewhere. They came to the house at last, out of the mist, quite suddenly. The carriage turned in at a gate between stone pillars and went up a short gravel drive, and there it was before them, an old stone house on the moor, long and low and solid, its windows glowing warm amber gold through the misty dark. A lantern lit above its door, ivy on its walls, a curl of wood smoke rising from a chimney into the night. Marielle looked at it through the carriage window, at its warm-lit windows glowing out into the darkness, and her breath caught, for it did not look cold or shut or unwelcoming as she had feared. It looked, in the misty dark, with its windows all alight, like the warmest and kindest and most welcoming thing she had ever seen. It looked like a house that was expecting someone. It looked, though she hardly dared to think it, like a house that had lit all its lamps and its fire and its door lantern, and was waiting, warm and ready, for her to come home. The carriage stopped before the door, and old Cuthbert climbed stiffly down and handed her out. And the door of the house opened, throwing a great warm bar of golden light out across the misty gravel, and a woman stood in the doorway, ample and warm and welcoming, wiping her hands on her apron, her kind face lit with pleasure. "Here she is," said the woman, coming out to them. "Here's the lass at last, come all this way. You'll be perished, my dear, and worn to a thread. Come in, out of the mist. There's a fire lit, and your supper waiting, and your room all ready this 2 days past. Come in, Miss Marielle. Come in, and welcome home." And Marielle Faringdon, who had not had a home, nor been welcomed anywhere, in all her 24 years, stepped down from the old carriage in the misty dark, and went toward the warm-lit doorway and the kind waiting woman. And something in her breast, some long-held tightness, some old ache of not belonging, loosened very gently and began, though she did not yet know it, to heal. Marielle woke that first morning to a fire already burning in her room, and did not, at first, understand it. She lay a moment in the strange, soft bed, in the grey light of a misty moorland morning, warm under the good thick blankets, and watched the small fire flickering in the little iron grate across the room, and was puzzled by it. She had gone to sleep the night before in a cold grate, she was almost sure, had been too tired after her supper to do more than undress and fall into the deep soft bed and sleep as she had not slept in years. She had not laid a fire. She was certain she had not laid a fire. And yet here it was, burning low and warm and cheerful in the grey dawn, as though someone had crept in while she slept and lit it, so that she should wake to warmth and not to cold. She thought, of course, that it must be the housekeeper, Mrs. Yarrow, the kind, ample woman who had welcomed her at the door. Of course. Mrs. Yarrow had come in early and lit the fire, that Marielle should wake warm on her first morning in a strange house. It was a kindness, a housekeeper's kindness, nothing stranger than that. And Marielle lay in the warm bed and looked at the fire and was touched by it, more touched than such a small thing warranted perhaps. But she had not often in her life woken to a fire lit for her by another's hands, and it moved her. She saw then the other things. On the little table beside the bed, where she had set down nothing the night before, there lay an open book, face up, and a pair of spectacles folded upon it, as though someone had been reading there, and had set the book down open, and laid her spectacles upon it, and stepped away only a moment before. Marielle looked at them a while from her pillow, the open book and the folded spectacles in the grey morning light. And then she rose and drew her shawl about her and went to look. The spectacles were an old woman's, small and round and gold-rimmed, worn thin at the bridge. And the book was open to a poem, an old gentle poem Marielle had known and loved as a child. A poem her own mother had used to read to her long ago before her mother died. A poem about home and coming home, and being gathered in at last out of the cold. Marielle stood by the little table in her shawl in the grey light and read it through. The loved old poem she had not seen in 20 years, and her eyes filled. For it was as though the book had been left open there on purpose, at that poem, for her to find, on her first morning, by someone who knew, impossibly, exactly what poem her mother had read her, and exactly how it would comfort her now. She could hear her mother's voice in it, even now, even after 20 years. Her mother had had a low, sweet reading voice, and had read to Marielle every night of her small childhood, in the years before the illness took her. And this poem had been among the last, a favourite of them both. Read over and over in the firelight of a lost warm nursery Marielle could scarcely remember and had never stopped missing. To find it here, open, on her first morning, in a strange house at the end of the world, was so strange and so tender a thing that Marielle could not look at it quite steadily. She told herself again that it was chance. But her heart, which knew better than her sensible head, was not deceived and went on quietly aching with a sweetness it had almost forgotten. But no one could know that. She stood by the table and told herself so, firmly in the grey light. No one in this house could possibly know that her mother had read her that poem. It was chance. The book had been left open, and it had happened to be that poem, and it had happened to move her. That was all. Aunt Marigold had been reading it, perhaps, at the end, and had left it open, and no one had moved it. And it was only chance, and Marielle's own tired, grieving heart, that made it seem meant. She told herself all this, sensibly, standing in her shawl, and she half believed it, and she closed the book gently, and did not quite, and left it open on the table where she had found it, at the poem about coming home. She dressed and went down, and found the house astir and warm and welcoming in the misty morning. Mrs. Yarrow was in the kitchen and greeted her warmly, and set before her such a breakfast as Marielle had not eaten in years. Porridge and cream and honey and new bread and a boiled egg and good strong tea. And Marielle, who was used to the thin, cold breakfasts of the schoolroom, eaten alone and hurried, sat at the scrubbed kitchen table in the warm, fire-lit kitchen and ate, and was fussed over, and felt, again, that strange, unfamiliar warmth of being cared for. She thanked Mrs. Yarrow over the breakfast for lighting her fire. "It was so kind of you," she said, "to come in and light it while I slept. I woke so warm. I have not woken to a fire lit for me in a very long time." Mrs. Yarrow looked at her over the teapot with a small, odd expression. "I didn't light your fire, my dear," she said. "I'd not go into your room while you slept. First morning in a strange house, I'd not dream of it. I thought you'd lit it yourself before you slept." She paused, and then she said, comfortably, dismissing it, "Happen you did, and were too tired to mind it. It's easy done, a first night in a strange place. No matter. There's more coal in the scuttle." And she went on with her work. But Marielle sat with her tea going cold in her hands, and did not say that she had not lit the fire, and knew she had not, and felt the first small, cool touch of the strangeness that was to come. Mrs. Yarrow, whose name was Morwenna, was a Yorkshire woman of 40-odd, broad and warm and capable, who had kept house for Miss Marigold these 20 years, and stayed on, after, to keep the house ready and aired against the coming of the heir. She was a comfortable, sensible, unfanciful woman, brisk and kind, and she took to Marielle at once, mothering her from the first morning, as though she had been waiting 20 years for a young thing to mother. And Marielle, who had never been mothered, took to her in turn, shyly, gratefully, the way a plant long kept in the cold turns to warmth. It was Morwenna who showed her the house, that first misty morning, room by room, and Marielle went through it in a kind of wonder, for it was the loveliest house she had ever been in, and it was hers. Not grand, it was no great mansion, only a good long, low old stone house, a gentlewoman's house, comfortable and worn and warm. But every room of it was beautiful, in the settled, loved, lived-in way of a house that has been made a home over long years. The morning room, with its faded chintz and its tall windows looking out over the moor. The little library, close and warm, its walls lined with old books. The conservatory, a small glass room full of ferns and geraniums, where the misty light came green and soft. The parlour with its piano and its worn good furniture and its bowls of the last September roses. It was a house that had been loved and lived in and cared for by a woman who had clearly had taste and warmth and a great gift for making a place comfortable and beautiful. And it was all Marielle's now, every room of it, every book and chair and rose bowl left to her by the great aunt she had never known. She'd everything just so, said Morwenna, showing her the morning room, plumping a faded cushion with a fond hand. Miss Marigold, she'd a way of making a room feel like an embrace, if you take my meaning. Folk always felt it, coming in. However cold the moor, however wild the weather, you came into this house and you felt, somehow, gathered up, warm, safe, welcome. She'd a gift for it. Morwenna looked about the beloved room, and her broad face softened. I've tried to keep it as she had it, this last while, against you coming. I didn't want you coming to a cold, dead house, my dear. I wanted you to feel it as she'd have had you feel it. Welcome. And Marielle, standing in the lovely, faded morning room that was now her own, felt it exactly so, felt gathered up and warm and safe and welcome as she had not felt anywhere in all her life. There were small signs of the old woman everywhere, once Marielle began to see them. A work basket by the morning room chair with a piece of needlework left in it, half finished, the needles still threaded. A pair of garden gloves on the conservatory shelf, shaped to a hand. A shelf of well-thumbed books by the parlour fire, their spines cracked with loving use. A china cup, a favourite by the look of it, set ready on its own hook by the kitchen dresser. The house was full of her, of Marigold, though Marigold was gone, full of the small worn traces of a long life lived warmly and well in these rooms, and Marielle, moving among them, felt she was coming to know her great-aunt through them, as though the old woman was speaking to her, quietly, through every loved and lived-with thing she had left behind. The day passed gently. There was a little business to see to, papers the solicitor had sent, but not much. And mostly, Marielle spent that first misty day simply being in the house, going from room to room, sitting in the window seats, looking out at the moor, growing slowly used to the strange, sweet fact that it was hers. Morwenna fed her and fussed over her, and left her to herself when she saw she wished it, and old Cuthbert came up from the stable to touch his hat and see that she was settling, and a stable boy, a bright, quick lad of 15 named Rufus, brought in coal and wood and grinned at her shyly, and was shy, grinned at in return, the first person near her own youth she had spoken to in a long time. He was a moor-bred lad, all elbows and freckles and quick bright eyes, mad for the old horse and the stable and the hills, and shy as a hare of the young lady from the south. But he warmed a little over the day, and told her, when she asked, the horse's name, which was Bramble, and how old he was, and how Miss Marigold had used to keep sugar in her pocket for him. And Marielle, who had been lonely so long among grown strangers, found something easing in the boy's shy, freckled friendliness, and thought that here, perhaps, was the beginning of a friend, which was a thing she had not had in longer than she liked to think. Toward evening, the mist lifted a little, and a watery gold light came out over the moor, and Marielle put on her thin cloak and went out for the first time to walk a little way from the house and see the country she had come to. She went out at the garden gate and along a stony track onto the open moor, into the vast rolling purple-brown country under the great pale evening sky. And she stood a while in the wind and the space and the enormous quiet, looking back at the low stone house with its smoking chimney, the one warm human thing in all that wild sweep of moor. And she felt her heart lift and ache at once with the beauty and the loneliness of it. It was so big, it was so beautiful, and it was so far from everything she had ever known. And yet the little house sat warm and lit in the midst of it, waiting for her to come back, and she found that she wanted to go back to it, that it already felt, after one day, more like home than any house she had lived in for years. The moor frightened her still, a little, with its bigness and its wildness and its enormous indifferent beauty. But it was a clean, good frightening, not the small, cold fear of not belonging that she had carried so long, and she found she did not mind it. She stood in the wind with her thin cloak whipping about her, and the last light going gold and grey over the endless heather, and she breathed the cold, sweet, peaty air, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, that she could breathe, that there was room here, room enough for even a small, unwanted life to spread itself and grow. She had spent 6 years in tall, narrow houses in narrow streets. Here was all the sky in the world, and a warm-lit house beneath it that was hers, and she stood in the great space of it as the dark came down, and felt something in her long, cramped heart begin, cautiously, to open. She walked back as the light was going, and came in at the garden gate in the dusk, and Morwenna had the lamps lit, and a good supper waiting, and Marielle ate it by the fire in the little parlour, and was warm, and was fed, and was, in a quiet, unaccustomed way, content. And when she went up to bed at last, tired and warm and easier in her heart than she had been in years, she found her fire lit again, burning low and cheerful in the grate, though she had said nothing, asked nothing, and knew that Morwenna swore she had not touched it. She stood in the doorway of her room and looked at the little burning fire, and this time the cool touch of strangeness was stronger, and she did not quite tell herself it was chance. Someone had lit her fire again. Someone was lighting her fire each night, that she should wake and sleep in warmth. Someone who did not wish to be thanked or seen or known. Someone who moved through the warm old house in the dark and the quiet and made it ready for her, kindly, patiently, invisibly, asking nothing. Marielle stood and looked at the fire and was not afraid, for there was nothing frightening in it, nothing but kindness. But she was moved deeply and puzzled and stirred, and she went to the little table by the bed where the open book still lay at the poem about coming home, and she saw that beside it, tonight, there lay something new, a small posy of the last purple heather of the year, freshly picked, tied with a thread, laid upon the open book where she could not fail to see it. Marielle picked it up, the little posy of heather, cool and fresh and faintly sweet, and held it, and looked at it in the candlelight. The last heather of the moor, picked that day for her, and laid on the poem about coming home, by hands she had not seen. And she stood a long time in the quiet candlelit room, holding the heather, with the fire burning low and warm behind her, and she did not try any longer to tell herself it was chance. It was not chance. It was a welcome. Someone or something in this warm old house on the moor was welcoming her home night by night, small kindness by small kindness. And Marielle, who had waited all her life to be welcomed anywhere, held the little posy of heather to her breast in the candlelight, and let herself cautiously, tremblingly, begin to believe that she was. She thought of her great-aunt, whom she had never met and would now never meet, the old woman who had sat by this very fire of an evening and grieved for a girl she had never seen, away in the cold south, alone, with no place of her own, and had said, "There is room for her here. She should come." And Marielle thought that whatever it was that lit her fire and left the heather and opened the book to the poem about coming home, it wished her only what Marigold had wished her, living, to be warm and welcomed and gathered up and made to feel, at last, that she was home. She did not understand it. She did not need to understand it. She only held the heather and looked at the fire and felt the old cold ache of her whole homeless life easing, night by night, in this warm, strange, kindly house on the moor. And she went to her bed and slept, warm and safe and watched over, more deeply than she had slept in years. The kindnesses went on, each day, each night, and Marielle stopped by the third or fourth morning, being surprised by them, and began instead to be quietly, deeply grateful. Each morning, her fire was lit before she woke. That was the first and the constant thing. She woke always to warmth, to the small, cheerful flicker of a fire someone had crept in and kindled while she slept. And each morning there was something else, some further small thing, laid where she would find it, chosen, it seemed, exactly for her. One morning, it was the breakfast things set for two in the little morning room, though she breakfasted alone. 2 places laid, 2 cups, 2 chairs drawn up, as though someone were to join her or had just risen and stepped away. and Marielle sat at the table set for two and did not feel alone but companioned, as though the empty place across from her were not empty at all. Another morning, it was a warm woolen shawl, soft and grey-green, exactly the grey-green of her own eyes, folded over her chair against the moor chill and left there for her, and it fitted her and suited her and warmed her, as though it had been chosen or made for her alone. Another morning, it was a little vase of the last roses from the conservatory set by her place. Another, a book she had spoken of loving only the day before to Morwenna, left open on the morning room table at the very tale she had named. And always the small things were exactly right. Never grand, never strange, never frightening, only exactly, tenderly, uncannily right, as though whoever left them had studied Marielle's whole shy, hidden heart and knew precisely what would comfort it. A cushion moved to the chair she liked best. Her cold tea quietly replaced with hot. The morning she sat too long dreaming at the window. A candle left burning in the dark passage the night she came up late and would have fumbled for the stair. Small things, the smallest things, the kind of small, constant, tender attention that a mother gives a child or a woman gives the one she loves best in the world. The kind of attention Marielle had watched other people receive all her life and had never once received herself. That was the thing that stopped Marielle's breath when she found it, the book. For she had said to Morwenna only the evening before, over their supper, speaking of her childhood, that the book she had loved best of all as a girl, the book she had read to tatters and lost somewhere in the long moves of her homeless years and grieved for since, was a certain old book of tales, a particular edition with certain pictures, and she had named it wistfully, not thinking, only making talk by the fire. And the next morning it was there on the morning room table, that very book, that very edition with those very pictures, open at the very tale she had loved most. An old worn copy, much read, clearly loved by someone else long before, waiting for her on the table in the morning light. Marielle stood before it a long while that morning and did not touch it at first, for no one could have got that book. It was not in the house. She had looked the evening before, half hoping, along the loaded library shelves, and it was not there. It was out of print, she thought, and rare, and in any case there had been no time. She had named it only the evening before, and no shop for 30 miles. And the book was here, this morning, open on the table. No one could have fetched it in the night. No one living could have known, before she spoke of it, to have it ready. And yet here it was. She picked it up, at last, and held it. The loved lost book of her childhood, come back to her out of nowhere on a misty moorland morning. And she turned its soft, worn pages and found her old friends, the tales and the pictures, exactly as she remembered them, exactly as her child self had pored over them in a warm, lost nursery 20 years gone. And her eyes filled, and this time she let them, standing alone in the morning room with the book in her hands, and the mist white against the tall windows. She did not understand how the book had come. She had stopped needing to understand. She understood only that someone, somehow, knew her lost childhood, her loved lost book, her grief for it, her secret unspoken longings. Knew her better, this unseen kindly presence in the old moor house, than anyone living had ever troubled to know her, and was giving her, morning by morning, not just warmth and welcome, but the deep, particular, tender knowing that Marielle had ached for all her life without ever daring to name. To be warm was much, to be welcomed was more, but to be known, truly known, in all one's small, hidden, particular self, one's lost books and loved poems and secret childhood griefs, and to be cherished for exactly that self, not used, not tolerated, not overlooked, but known and wanted and cared for. That was the thing Marielle had never had from anyone in all her 24 years. And it was the thing this quiet house was giving her now, morning by morning, without a word, without a face, without asking anything at all in return. She had not known, until she was given it, how starved of it she had been. She spoke of it to Morwenna that day, because she could not keep it to herself any longer. Asked her, plainly, over the kitchen table, who it was that lit her fire and left the shawl and found the book, and Morwenna set down her rolling pin and wiped her floury hands and looked at Marielle a long, steady moment with her kind, shrewd Yorkshire eyes. And then she said, slowly, "I don't light your fire, my dear, nor leave the things. I'll tell you plain, for you're not a foolish lass, and you'd know if I lied. It isn't me. I come in of a morning, and the fire's already lit, same as you. I've wondered at it myself this week past since you came, but I'll tell you what I think." She sat down across the table heavily and folded her floury hands and said, quiet and plain and unafraid, "I think it's her, Miss Marigold. I think she's not done looking after this house, nor the folk in it, just because she's gone. She looked after everyone, all her life, all of us. And she wanted you here so bad this last year. Wanted you to have the house and be warm in it and feel it home. And I don't think a little thing like dying would stop her seeing you settled. That's what I think. I'm not a fanciful woman, Miss Marielle, but I've kept this house 20 years, and I knew Miss Marigold, and I think she's welcoming you home the only way that's left to her. And I think you should let her. That's all. I think you should let her, and be glad." Marielle sat at the kitchen table, with the flour dust settling in the firelight, and did not answer for a while. And she found she was not frightened by what Morwenna said, not at all, but eased by it, and warmed, and moved almost past bearing. She did not know whether to believe it. Her sensible head could not quite believe it, but her heart, which had been slowly filling all the week with warmth and welcome and the sense of being known, her heart believed it, or wished to, and she thought that whether or not it was true, in the way sensible things were true, it was true in the way that mattered, that she was being welcomed home and looked after and loved by someone who knew her and wished her well, and that Morwenna was right and she should let it and be glad. All her life she had been the one who gave the care and never took it, the governess who tended other people's children, the daughter who had nursed a dying mother and then a dying father, the quiet one who asked for nothing and expected less. It was a strange thing, and a hard one almost, to let herself be cared for now, to lie still in the warm bed of a morning and simply receive the kindness, to take and not to give. But Morwenna was right. It was time she let someone look after her. And so she resolved, sitting at the flowery table, to stop questioning it, and to open her hands, and to let the kindness in. That afternoon, drawn by something she did not examine, Marielle went to find her great-aunt's own room. She had not been into it yet. Morwenna had shown her all the house that first day, all but this, had passed the closed door at the end of the upstairs passage with a soft, and that was her room, Miss Marigold's, and had not opened it, and Marielle had not asked. But this afternoon, with Morwenna's words warm in her, and the loved book found, and the whole strange, sweet mystery of the week gathered close about her, she went up alone to the end of the passage and stood before the closed door of her great-aunt's room, and, after a moment, gently opened it and went in. It was a lovely room. That was the first thing. A lovely, warm, comfortable old bedroom, the best in the house, its windows looking out over the whole vast sweep of the moor. And it was, Marielle saw at once, a kept room. Not shut up, not shrouded, not made into a cold, sad museum of the dead, but kept, lovingly, as though its owner were only just out of it and might come back at any moment. There was a fire laid ready in the grate, though not lit. There were fresh flowers on the dressing table, the last roses only a day or two old. The bed was made with a soft old quilt turned down, and on the dressing table and the bedside table and the mantel lay all the small, dear, ordinary things of a long life. A silver-backed brush and comb, a little dish of hairpins, a worn prayer book, a bottle of lavender water, a pair of gloves, a fan, and framed photographs, old faded photographs, of people Marielle did not know, in the dress of years gone by. The room smelled faintly of lavender water and wood smoke and old roses, a warm, dim, grandmotherly smell, the smell of a long life gently lived. And Marielle, breathing it, felt she knew her great-aunt better in that one room than she had learned from all Cuthbert's tales and Morwenna's memories together. Here was where the old woman had slept and woken and dressed and said her prayers and looked out at her beloved moor through all the seasons of 40 years. Here was the brush she had drawn through her long grey hair, the gloves she had drawn onto her hand, the prayer book she had held. The room was warm with her still, warm with the whole long, kindly presence of her, though she was gone. And it was not sad, standing in it, not sad at all, but tender and close and strangely comforting, like being let at last into the confidence of someone who had loved you long before you knew. She moved about the kept room quietly in the misty afternoon light and looked at the small dear things and did not touch them, for they were not hers to touch. And she came at last to the dressing table and to the photographs standing there in their old frames, and she looked at them, the faded pictures of unknown faces, her great-aunt's people, her own people that she had never known, and she felt no fear looking at them, only a great tenderness and a great longing to have known them, to have belonged to them, to have had them in her life. She did not know their faces. She could not read them clearly, for the photographs were old and dim and soft with age, the faces gentle blurs of grey and cream. But they were her family, her lost, unknown family, standing on her great-aunt's dressing table in the misty light, and Marielle stood among them and felt, for the first time in her orphaned life, that she came from somewhere, that she had people, that she was not, after all, the first and last and only of her line, alone in the world, but part of something long and deep that went back and back. There was a comfort in that beyond almost anything the week had given her. All her life she had felt herself a single thread, loose, unanchored, belonging to no cloth. The last Faringdon, orphaned, rootless, blowing about the world alone. And here, in these dim old faces on the dressing table, were the others of her cloth, the ones she came from, the long line of her people going back into the soft grey past. And though she had never known them, and never would, she was of them, woven in, part of the weave. And the knowledge settled into her long, lonely heart like a warm hand, and steadied her, and made her feel, standing in the quiet room, that she had roots after all, deep ones, and a place to belong that went back far beyond her own small, homeless life. And there, on the corner of the dressing table, a little apart, propped where the light from the window would fall on it, was one more thing that had not been there. Marielle felt sure when she first came into the room, or that she had not seen. A small thing laid ready, waiting. A folded shawl, soft and grey-green, the twin of the one that had been left on her chair, and upon it a small posy of the last heather, and beside it the loved book of her childhood that she had left downstairs on the morning-room table not an hour since. And that was here now, in the kept room, on her great-aunt's dressing table, open at the tale she loved best. The shawl, the heather, the book, her three kindnesses, gathered together and laid ready in the heart of the kept room, in the soft, misty light, as though to say to her, plainly, gently, past all doubting, these are from me. This is my room, and these are my gifts, and I have brought you here to show you. You are welcome, child. You are known. You are home. Marielle stood in the kept room, in the misty afternoon light, before the little gathered offering of shawl and heather and book, and she did not weep, though her heart was very full. She only stood and looked and understood, past all her sensible doubting, that she was loved. She did not know how. She did not know by what or in what way, or whether the world would call it possible. She knew only that in this warm old house on the wild moor, she had been gathered up and welcomed and known and loved by someone who had wanted her here long before she came, and wanted her here still, and that whatever it was kind, wholly kind, and wished her nothing but warmth and belonging and home. And Marielle, standing in her great-aunt's kept room among the faded photographs of the people she came from, with the last light falling on the shawl and the heather and the loved book, felt the last of the old, cold, homeless ache go out of her heart, quietly, for good. And she said softly, aloud, to the kept room, to the gifts, to the great-aunt she had never met, and yet somehow, now, deeply knew, "Thank you. I'm glad I came. I should like to stay." And the misty light lay soft on the room, and the fire waited, laid in the grate. And somewhere below, a door opened, and Morwenna called her name for tea. And Marielle wiped her eyes, and took one last look at the lovely kept room and its gathered gifts, and went down, lighter than she had come up, to the warm house and the waiting tea, and her new life and her home. On the last morning of that first strange, sweet week, Marielle woke to a fire lit, as always, and lay a while in the warmth watching it. And then she rose and went to the little table by the bed to see what small kindness had been left for her in the night. And there was nothing. The table was bare. The open book was still there, at the poem about coming home, where it had lain all the week. But there was no new thing beside it this morning. No posy of heather, no folded shawl, no small tender gift chosen just for her. For the first morning since she came, there was nothing laid ready. Only the book and the lit fire and the grey, misty morning at the window. Marielle sat down on the edge of the bed in her nightgown and looked at the bare table and felt for a moment the small cold clutch of loss she had half feared all week would come. The kindness had ended. The welcome was over. Whatever it was that had lit her fire and left her gifts and known her heart had stopped. This last morning, and she was alone again, a stranger in a strange house, as she had always in the end been alone. And then she looked again, and looked into her own heart, and understood, and the loss turned, even as she felt it, into something else, something warm and whole and final and right. For she was not, this morning, the frightened girl who had stepped down from the evening train a week ago into the cold and the dark and the not knowing. That girl had been afraid the house would not want her. This morning, she knew, past all fear, that it did, that it always had, that it would want her all her days. And a woman who knows herself at home does not need a fire lit for her in secret, or a gift laid ready to be told she belongs. She belongs and knows it, and the knowing is warmth enough. The table was bare because it did not need to be otherwise anymore. That was the whole of it. She sat on the edge of the bed in the grey morning light and understood it, clearly and gently and completely. The kindnesses had never been an end in themselves. They had been a welcome, a long, patient, tender welcome, offered morning by morning to a frightened homeless girl who did not know whether she was wanted, to teach her slowly, gently, past all her fear and doubt, that she was wanted, that she was known, that she was home, and she had learned it. That was the thing. Somewhere in the strange, sweet week, in the fires and the heather and the shawl and the loved book, in the kept room and the gathered gifts and Morwenna's plain, kind words, Marielle had learned it all the way down, past her sensible, doubting head and into her long, cold heart, that she was welcome here, that she belonged here, that this was her home. And now that she had learned it, the welcome was complete and could rest. The gifts need not come any more, because their whole work was done, because Marielle no longer needed to be told, morning by morning, that she was home. She knew it now. She felt it in her bones. The house was hers, and she belonged in it, and the long, tender teaching was over, because the pupil had learned her lesson and was home at last. It was like the hand that lets go of yours, Marielle thought, when at last you can walk alone, not withdrawn in coldness, but opened in gladness, because you no longer need it, because you are steady on your own 2 feet at last. The kindness had not gone away. It had only gently finished, and its finishing was not a loss, but a completion. the quiet full stop at the end of a long, loving sentence, the sign that the thing it had set out to do was wholly and perfectly done. She sat on the edge of the bed a long while in the grey, misty light, and she was not sad, after all, not sad in the least. She was filled instead with a deep, still brimming peace, the peace of a thing gently and wholly completed. She rose, and she went to the bare little table, and she picked up the open book, the poem about coming home, and she read it once more, slowly, all the way through. And then she closed it gently, for the first time all week, and held it to her breast a moment and set it down. She did not need it open anymore. She was home now. She did not need to be shown the way in. She dressed and went down through the warm old house that was hers, and it was a morning like the mornings that had gone before, and yet wholly different because she moved through it now, not as a stranger, not as an heir come to settle and sell, but as a woman come home to her own house at last. She saw it all with new eyes. That last morning of the week, the morning room, the library, the conservatory with its green, misty light, the parlour with its piano and its roses, and it was all hers, all home, and she loved it, and she knew, past any doubt, that she would never sell it, never leave it, never go back to the long grey road of other people's houses, that she would live here, on the moor, in the warm old house, all her days, and grow old here, as her great-aunt had grown old here, and be happy. She had never, in all her life, been able to think more than a season ahead. A governess does not own her future, but holds it at the pleasure of others, a term at a time, a family at a time, never knowing where she will be sent next or whether she will be kept. And now, this morning, Marielle found that she could see her whole life stretching ahead of her, long and settled and rooted in this one place. Springs and summers and autumns and winters on the moor. Years of them, a lifetime of them, all in this house, all her own. And the sheer unaccustomed richness of it, the luxury of a future she could see and hold and count on, made her almost dizzy with gratitude. She had a home. She had a future. She had, at last, a place in the world that would not be taken from her. She thought of all the tall, cold houses she had lived in and left, the borrowed rooms, the schoolrooms, the narrow beds that were never hers, the doors she had closed behind her 12 times and never once been sorry to leave. And she thought that she would never close such a door again, that this house, this one warm old stone house on the moor, was the last house she would ever come to as a stranger, and the first she would ever leave when she left it at all as its own. And the thought was so sweet and so strange and so long awaited that she had to stand a moment in the morning room doorway and simply hold it, the way you hold a thing you have wanted your whole life and hardly dare believe you have. She told Morwenna so, over the breakfast, plainly and gladly, that she would not be selling the house, that she meant to stay, to live here, to make it her home. And Morwenna set down the teapot, and her broad, kind face broke into a slow, warm smile, and her eyes grew bright, and she came round the table and took Marielle's face in her 2 flowery hands and kissed her forehead and said, "There, there now, that's what she wanted. That's what she wanted all along, the old dear. You staying, you home." and she wiped her eyes with her apron and laughed at herself for it, and went to make a fresh pot of tea to celebrate. And Marielle sat in the warm kitchen with her heart full, and was home. And she thought, sitting there, that she would keep the house as her great-aunt had kept it, warm and open and welcoming, a house that gathered people up and made them feel safe and wanted, that she would keep a fire lit and a place laid and a welcome ready, always, for whoever came cold and lonely to her door as she had come. For she knew now, as she had never known before, what such a welcome was worth, what it could do, how it could mend a long broken heart. And she meant to spend her life giving it in this house, on this moor, as Marigold had given it to her. That would be her thanks. That would be how she passed it on. Later that morning, she went up once more to her great-aunt's room, the kept room at the end of the passage. She did not go to look for gifts. She went, this time, only to sit a while, quietly, in the lovely warm room among the faded photographs and the small dear things, and to be near, in whatever way one could be near, the great aunt she had never met and yet had come in a single week to love. She sat in the low chair by the cold laid fire, in the misty morning light, and she looked at the dim old faces of her people on the dressing table, and she felt no strangeness now and no fear, only a deep, quiet kinship, a sense of sitting among family. And she said softly into the still room that she would keep it just so, the room always exactly as it was for as long as she lived. And then she rose and drew the door gently to behind her, not shut, only to, and went down to her day. She went out that last morning of the week when the breakfast was cleared, to walk on the moor, and the mist was lifting, and a soft gold September sun was breaking through, lighting the vast rolling purple-brown country all about, so that it lay bathed and glowing and beautiful under the clearing sky. She walked out along the stony track onto the open moor, in her great-aunt's grey-green shawl, with the loved book in her pocket, and the last heather nodding all about her. And she went up to the crest of the moor above the house, and stood there in the wind and the widening sun, and looked out over the whole enormous glowing country that was her home now, and down at the little grey house nestled warm in the folds of it, with its smoke rising and its windows catching the sun. And she was, in that moment, standing on the high moor in the September light, happier than she had ever been in all her life. The wind came clean and cold and sweet off the miles of heather, and tugged at her shawl and brought her the smell of peat and bracken and the far-off sea. And the larks went up, and the light widened and warmed over the great glowing land. And Marielle stood in the midst of it, a small figure on the high moor, and felt herself for the first time not small at all, not lost, not alone, but rooted and held, and at home in the vast, beautiful world, as though the moor itself had taken her in, along with the house, and made a place for her in its great wild heart. For she had come home. That was the whole of it, and it was everything. She, Marielle Faringdon, who had been born to no place and belonged to no one, who had lived out of one small bag, from house to house for 6 long, lonely years, who had thought herself the last and least and loneliest of her line, Alone in all the world, she had come, at the end of the world, to a home left to her, kept for her, made ready for her, warmed and welcomed and waiting for her, by a great aunt she had never met, who had loved her somehow, before ever she came, and had wanted her here, and had welcomed her home the only way that was left, patiently, tenderly, night by night, until Marielle believed it, and she believed it now. She stood on the high moor in the gold September morning, and believed it all the way down, and was home, and was wanted, and was known, and was loved, and the old cold, homeless ache was gone from her heart forever, and in its place was a deep, warm rootedness, a belonging, a peace, that she knew, standing there, would never leave her again. She looked down at the little house, at the smoke rising straight and blue in the still gold morning, at the windows catching the sun, at the whole small, warm-rooted world of it in the vast embrace of the moor. And she thought that some things, the deepest and best things, do not need to be understood to be received. She did not understand her week of kindnesses. She never would, but she did not need to. She had only to receive them and be changed by them and be grateful. And she was, wholly and forever grateful, standing on the high moor in the widening light, for the strange, sweet, patient love that had brought her home. She stayed on the moor a long while, in the clearing gold light, and then she turned and walked back down toward the little house, her home, warm and waiting in the folds of the moor. And as she came down the track, she saw old Cuthbert at the stable, rubbing down the horse, and young Rufus carrying water, and Morwenna at the kitchen door shaking a cloth. The small, warm, human life of the house going on in the September sun. And they waved to her as she came, all three. And she waved back and quickened her step, glad to be coming home to them, glad of the warm house and the kind faces and the whole good-rooted life that lay before her now. The sun was full out now, and the mist all gone, and the moor lay glowing russet and gold and purple to every horizon. Larks somewhere high and invisible pouring down their song, the good peaty wind moving in the heather, and the little house sat warm and bright in the midst of it, smoke rising, windows shining, the kind faces at their morning work waiting for her. And Marielle went down to it through the gold September morning, with a heart so full and so light that she could have sung and was home and knew it and was glad. She went in at the garden gate and up to the door and into the warm old house that was hers and was home. And now the mist is settling soft over the moor, and the last light is going gold and grey behind the hills, and far out in all that wild, dark country, one small stone house stands warm and lit, its windows glowing amber into the night. Inside, the fire burns low, the last roses stand in their bowl, a grey-green shawl is folded over a chair, and a well-loved book lies closed at last upon the table, its work all done. The house is quiet and warm and gathered in, holding all its sleepers safe against the wide dark moor. Let the wind move soft in the heather. Let the lamp in the window burn gently down. Let the old house settle and creak and grow still, warm to its very heart, keeping watch over everyone within. Wherever you have wandered, and however long you have felt yourself a stranger, there is a place kept for you tonight, warm and waiting, with a fire lit and a soft bed turned down. You need travel no further. You are expected here. You are welcome. You are home. So let your eyes grow heavy and your breath grow slow and sink down soft into the warm dark, like a house settling for the night. Somewhere a fire has been lit for you. Somewhere a place has been kept. Sleep now, dear one, warm and wanted and safe. You are home. Good night.